Appreciate everybody coming out here tonight. Somewhat short notice. Well, we have this unique opportunity yet again between our regular session and special session, and unfortunately, and the reason for that is, I'm sure most of you know, the legislature was not able to finish the budget in a 105-day period. So I'm going to give you just a kind of my viewpoint from what's happened over the last 105 days, and then really just open this up to what's on your minds and what questions you have. I'll preface that by saying I may not have all the answers. I probably won't. I know I won't, but we'll certainly get back to you. And the other thing I've mentioned, there's roughly 4,000 bills that get introduced in the long session. I don't know every one of those. So if there's something particular to a bill that you want more information on, we will get it to you. And out of those 4,000, only about 250 to 300 ever come to law. So that's just gives you an idea of what the pace is like down there. And a lot of things get introduced and never even get a committee hearing. So they're, some of them are way off my radar. So this is as you know, it's my freshman term. Got sworn in January, and this was our long session. And in the House, we've got the Democrats have a 7-seat majority. In the Senate, everybody knows what's going on there. There's a coalition of 23 Republicans and 2 Democrats, including Senator Sheldon. And so there's some philosophical divides there between the 2 chambers. And then, of course, Governor Inslee, has his differences even with the House. And out of that, over these past 105 days, we've spent the first third of the session on policy bills and debating those, hearing those in committee, taking them to the House to vote, and then you flip and whatever you pass out of the House goes on to the Senate. Whatever the Senate passed comes over to us, and you start that process over, and that takes you into March. And there's a key date in March, and that's March 20th, and that's when the economic revenue forecast is released by the State Economic Board. And that figure is key to developing the state budget. And as in times past when things have been good, it's easier to develop a budget and come to terms and come to agreement between the three parties, the House, Senate, and the governor. When times are tougher, it doesn't work so well. And also the forecast, as we've seen in the past few biennium, is not very accurate, or has been less accurate. They haven't been able to foresee some of the downturns that we've had. And so those are the challenges that have been created. There was a great article in, I believe it was the Tacoma Tribune or maybe the Seattle Times, about the number of special sessions that have occurred since 1980. It's actually been quite a few, even when economic times were good. And again, I believe a big part of that is because we get that economic forecast so late. We adjourned, our sine die, our last day of the session was April 28th. We had that forecast on March 20th. They work on the budget before that, certainly, but again, you don't have those final numbers to plug in to move forward, and wherever your political philosophy is on it. And so you have a very small, narrow time frame to plug it in and move forward and get all the parties working together. And so we got up to April 28th, and it was real obvious probably about two and a half weeks before that we were nowhere close to getting it done. And it's just the reality of the situation, and that's where we're at. So, as you know, the governor's called a special session. We'll start on Monday and get back to work on that. That doesn't mean that nothing's been happening since then. I serve on 4 committees. One of them is the capital budget, which is not the operating budget. It's a little bit different. Capital budget deals with the buildings in the state, land acquisitions, some of our ecology programs. So think of it like your home improvements. That's what the capital budget is. And then you have the operating budget, and there's the transportation budget. So I'm on the capital budget committee, the early learning and human resources committee, agriculture and natural resources, and then also business and financial services. And so just speaking strictly from the capital budget standpoint, one of the 4 House negotiators, Representative Hans Dunshee is the chair, and then on the Republican side, Judy Warnick is what's called the ranking member, and I'm the assistant ranking member. And then Derek Stanford is the vice chair for the Democrats. The 4 of us, we have been continuously meeting, a lot of times by email, but that's been ongoing. We started meeting with the Senate in early April to start to come together to have a budget ready. The capital budget's the last one to go through the process because it's dependent on what happens in the operating budget. So if this all sounds confusing, it is, but it all comes together at the end product, and so that is what's been going on. When we go into session Monday, it's not going to be like the previous 105 days. The legislature is not going to meet every day. It's what's called a rolling session, and you have to be available with 24 hours notice to be in Olympia to cast a vote. So my hope is in the special session that we devote our time to doing the budget and we stay away from policy. We had our opportunity to pass policy bills. I don't think we should waste more of your money, frankly, debating policy bills one way or the other. We need to focus on the budget and get it done. Our schools are dependent on it. They need to know what's going to happen, to plan for the next school year. They've got, I think May 15th is your key date. Is that right? To let teachers know whether they've got a job next year.
Yeah, unless we get an extension.
Right. Right, which you'll probably have an extension. Yeah. So there's, so coming in the special session is called for 30 days at a time, and the governor can call it again. I sure hope that's not the case. I hope we do complete this in this 30-day period. I just heard earlier that some budget negotiations went very well today on the operating budget, so that's positive, and we can hopefully move forward from there. So that's a real brief overview, and I don't want to keep rambling on. What my objective is to hear from you what concerns you have and what you want to see happen, and and then I can take that back to Olympia and go from there. So, and again, I'll just preface by saying, if there isn't something I can specifically answer, we're going to get back to you. And also, before I forget, Kevin Schutte in the back here is my legislative aide, and if you've ever called in or stopped in, he's the one you see first or hear first, and he's done a great job and has helped a tremendous amount. So with that, I just want to open it up and see what's on your mind. So who's first?
Before you get off of the subject of the special session, you don't want to talk about anything but the budget, but are there other legislators there that will be pushing to get things passed? Do we still need to be watching to see what bills are going to be going through?
Sure. If there are bills that concern you, either positively or negatively, yeah, you do need to keep your eye open because anything is possible. What happens when we adjourn the sine die, the end of the regular session, is that any bill that was not passed into law returns to its highest state that it achieved. And what that means, so if a bill passed the House and was in a Senate committee hearing, it returns to having just passed the House, and then that Senate chairman would have to decide whether he wants to continue to hear it. If a bill had passed through that same situation, if a bill passed the House, was referred to the Senate, made it through the committee, made it through the rules to get onto the Senate floor, it would return back to the Senate Rules Committee to determine whether or not to bring it back forward to the Senate for a vote and vice versa. So yes, anything is possible. We can pass by resolution, by joint resolution with the Senate. We could pass a directive basically saying we're only going to talk about these things. I haven't heard anything in the last 2 weeks as to whether or not that's going to happen on a joint resolution. Find out on Monday. But I certainly hope so. I hope we do limit this to strictly the budget. But yes, so if there are issues to you that are important, you need to keep your eye open on them. And the other thing too is that we operate this 2-year cycle. So anything that doesn't come out of this session or a special session is still alive come January. It doesn't have to be, it just gets reintroduced. It doesn't have to be redrafted. It keeps the same bill number, and come January when we go into the next session, everything is open. So that's a great question, though. What else?
A couple of things. When we had the joint meeting at Public Works, you were there along with the representative Ted and Danny Murphy, and the court was there, and the county and everything. And I had sent a letter to you about secret changing the streamline. And there was a part in there about trying to keep the public from being able to appeal to the growth management board. And you answered my letter and said that you were going to keep an eye on that to see if anything. And I was wondering if that I hadn't had a chance to follow it up and find out if anything came through on it.
Nothing has gone through on that. Kevin, if you can make a note on that, and let's get back to it. So there weren't any major changes that occurred.
Okay.
But I am aware, and I do remember our conversation.
Yeah, because I think that's appeal to,
Right.
government agencies.
Yep.
And one other thing was the letter you wrote about Belfer bypass.
Mhm.
Who pays for that,
Who pays for what?
that bypass?
Well, ultimately, we do as taxpayers.
Well, taxpayers,
Yes.
I mean, is it the county that is solely responsible for that, or are they getting money from the state or federal or what?
Yeah, so let's talk about the Belfair bypass in general. From my viewpoint, it was to get it done as a state project, okay, and within the State Department of Transportation. The county can certainly do it if they want to, and if they have the funds to do it. They can make a county road and make that the Belfair bypass, and the state have nothing to do with it. It has been tried to get into the State Department of Transportation budget for the last however many years, 40, and has not happened. And what she's referring to, I had written an opinion to the Shelton Journal a couple weeks ago. So we passed a transportation budget. The transportation budget is separate; it's its own budget. And we passed one. It was strictly a bare bones operating budget, maintaining the status quo for transportation projects in the state, not adding any new ones to it. The chair of the House Transportation Committee, Judy Cliburn, has also proposed what I would, supplemental is not the right word, an additional transportation project that would, in her words, increase revenue and then fund various projects throughout the state, including the Belfair bypass. Well, that additional revenue was a 10-cent increase in gas tax, plus a weight fee on trucks, and plus, I believe there was a hybrid fee that was in there. There was a multitude of fees. It would pay for everything from the Columbia River crossing to the Belfair bypass and to everything else. Well, I heard probably, and Kevin can attest to this, 20 to 1 from my constituents, not to get a gas tax. And I firmly believe that too. I don't believe the answer in getting some of these transportation projects done is in cranking up the taxes. It's one of the most regressive taxes. The people that can least afford it end up having to pay the most. And we have 50% of the people in this county commuting outside the county every day for work. That would be a huge burden to them. And the Belfair bypass, we can get it done by reforming transportation, the Department of Transportation. We can get it done by having priorities for DOT. And they had them in early 2000, 2001, and those priorities were freight mobility and congestion relief. And those are clearly defined objectives. And then around 2004 or 5, the Senate had a bill that stripped that out, and they put in non-definable terms like the movement of people. Well, and with that, the Transportation Department has embarked on projects that you can define as moving people, sure, but have they done anything for congestion relief or freight mobility, which are economic drivers? No, they haven't. We're spending $1 billion to build a light rail tunnel from Westlake in downtown Seattle to the U District. $1 billion. We could build 20 Belfair bypasses for that. It's time, rural districts have just gotten clobbered by the lack of priorities in the DOT. And, what I would call this region's legislative delegation, we have locked arms on this, Republican and Democrat. I can't speak for Representative Haig or for Representative Hansen, some of the others, but Representative Angel up in Kitsap. But we all want the Belfair bypass done. That I can tell you. We can find the ways to do it without continuing to add cost to you. We need to reform DOT, fix it before we fund it more. So those are my viewpoints on the Belfair bypass. It's my hope we can get it done. But it's not going to, let's be pragmatic, it's not going to happen in this
It just
biennium.
seems like the wrong time with the economic situation is to take on something like this. I mean, we've got to mess with the Belfair sewer system
Right.
that we're paying through the nose for, because that's blossomed or ballooned to $47 million.
Yep.
And
Could you just repeat the question? When they asked him, we couldn't hear what she was asking the first time.
So yeah, her original question was regarding SEPA and growth management, and there's been a movement to remove some of the appeals processes to the local jurisdictions, and that's the concern that's out there. So I'm sorry, I should have caught you earlier.
I have a couple of questions, but the first one would be dovetailing with the current one. Is the capital improvement project, the 6-year capital improvement project that was passed by the county, did that hurt us by putting welfare bypass on that CIP? Let the state off the hook because it looked like it was proactive, and of course we couldn't be, in your opinion?
I think that's probably fair to say, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
That, you know, in speaking with the DOT, so each region has a representative from the Department of Transportation that covers their region, and so ours, off the top of my head, I forget the gentleman's name, but he basically has the Olympic region. And I met with him a month or so ago, and going back a number of years, one of the things that's kind of prevented the welfare bypass from moving forward is a lack of community unity on it. And you can, I don't want to point fingers, the bottom line was there was a lack of consensus on where it should be built and how big it should be. And so, you know, when the DOT sees things like that, they're not going to get involved in a community argument. They just step back and, hey, let us know when you're ready. So that played into it a little bit, certainly.
My main question is regarding regulations. You and I have a couple of things in common. We were both in the Navy, and we both started investment businesses that succeeded. And we abided by all the regulations, both in the Navy, which were stringent, as you know, and also the business regulations when we got out of the Navy. But we were successful, even though we abided by them. Now there's a whole lot of rhetoric and a whole lot of blaming for failure to attract business and maintain business that is being attributed to regulation. What's that all about? I feel personally that you're just blaming, you didn't want it bad enough, and you're blaming your failures on something external to yourself. What are your feelings about more regulations in general?
I think, you know, so the question is regulations, you know, and good, bad, you know, are they the cause for a lack of business growth in this state? And I'd say yes, they are. I believe we are heavily regulated in this state. You know, you have to have sensible regulations. Yes, you do. We have to protect the environment. Who's against it, right? You have to have rules in place. You can't just have somebody open a bank in their garage. I mean, that's not gonna, you know, that would create instability. So there's a necessity for a certain amount of regulation. I believe that we need to look back and say, has this worked? You know, we can make the case that something needs to go into place, but very rarely does the state legislature stop and say, is this still working what was done 20 years ago or 5 years ago? So I'm an advocate for sunset provisions, and if something's working, then we can move it forward. We can keep it there. And it's, you know, you look at any one regulation or any one little fee or any one little tax, it's never that one that you can say is the issue for everything. It's something here, it's something there, it's over here. And just take the Department of Transportation as an example, with not the DOT, but the transportation budget. And in this revenue package that was proposed that would fund everybody's pet project across the state, there's fees upon fees on gross vehicle weight for trucks. There's the gas tax increase. It also gives the Secretary of Transportation the authority to increase it another 3 cents if he or she sees fit. That's kind of removing legislative oversight. But go back to the vehicle weight fees. A trucking firm in Spokane calculated it out, the impact to their business. And it was 6 figures. What's right next to Spokane? Idaho. Let's take a mobile asset and threaten to tax them into oblivion. They're going to move that mobile asset. And they're in the process of doing that and going across the border to Idaho. They can still serve their customers, but now they'll be an Idaho-based business. So I do feel that that is a hindrance to growth. Yes, I'm certainly for having sensible regulations that are consistent and understandable.
I guess for smaller businesses, do you believe they impede small businesses from succeeding?
I believe it is a hindrance. Again, I'm not advocating throw everything out. We need to just stop and look. Does it make sense what we have that we thought was necessary 5, 10, 15 years ago? So, yeah.
I apologize because I may have missed this at the beginning. I came in late, but my question is a personal question. I'm the principal at Mountain View Elementary, and so currently there is a proposal for all-day kindergarten in the Senate budget, and there's a proposal for all-day kindergarten in the House budget. Naturally, they don't match up right now. My concern is, number one, because we've moved into a second session, we're delaying decisions that we could be making. I mean, we're currently enrolling students as of May 1st, and we're not able to help our parent community know what the options are out there for them, first of all. The second concern that I have, and so I'm concerned about the delay as we're moving down and thinking about what's that going to look like, because the school year is closing out in the middle of June, and whether we're going to have those decisions in place.
Right.
But the second part of it is that the way that the funding is, we might be able to fund 2 of our elementary schools with an all-day kindergarten, but the third school would not be able to have an all-day kindergarten because of the way the funding package looks. In a district the size of Seattle, to say that you're going to have some students not having all-day kindergarten and other students have all-day kindergarten, it looks a little different. When you're in a smaller community like Shelton, to be able to say that 2/3 of the students have access to all-day kindergarten and 1/3 of the students will not, seems like you're discriminating against a group of students. And I'm concerned about that, trying to see what we might do to move you closer so that the House and the Senate have a closer view on what would happen, et cetera, and what we might do from this end.
Yeah, so the question and the concern is overall with education, but predominantly with full-day kindergarten, and it's crunch time for districts and schools to make those decisions as to what they're going to do and what they can offer. And again, we don't have a budget passed to give that direction. So a couple of things along that line. First of all, the House budget and the Senate budget, and then the governor coming late to the game with the budget in April. I can assure you none of those 3 budgets will be the budget. I promise you that. Because none of them are going to agree with each other on it. So there's that, first of all. So I wouldn't, whichever side of the spectrum you might be on, don't get caught up on somebody's budget being the wrong one or the right one, because none of them are going to be the final product. But a solution to that this goes back to January, the first week of session. House Republicans, we proposed a House rule to make education the first budget and a standalone budget, just like transportation is. And I made a floor speech to that effect because it is our paramount duty. I mean, the Constitution, the state Constitution is very specific to that point. We also proposed a law because we failed on the rule vote, it failed on party lines, and I'm not trying to be partisan, I'm just trying to lay out the facts here, though. It failed on a party line vote. We proposed a rule, or a law, excuse me, to propose a bill to put in the statute that would require education be funded first as its own standalone budget. Never got a hearing. I believe these are common sense solutions. We could start an education budget and have it done before the middle of session is over, or at least significant progress, and be passed before the regular session is over. And just like the capital budget is dependent on the operating budget, the transportation budget has an impact on the operating budget. You can fund education, we can get it done, have that standalone budget, and then say basically to the operating budget, here's the cost to that budget. I believe we can accomplish that and solve a lot of these problems. I'll never forget last fall, the superintendent for the Rochester School District, Kim Fay is her name, and she said to me, the biggest challenge as a superintendent is that they can figure out how to manage with less, but it's when it's in the middle of the school year and the state says we're cutting this out because we've done supplemental budgets over the past biennium because of the economic downturn, and the state turns around and says we're cutting this, you're down these many dollars. So that's the hardest thing to handle. How do you change course midstream? And I believe that's unfair to do as well. So I'm a proponent that we need to have a standalone education budget that's done first, and then we worry about the rest of the budget process. And that would solve that big question mark that exists for school districts and for parents, and teachers, and students. And so I hear you. I understand. I mean, the most frustrating thing the last week in the session, we had to put a bill through the House that would extend this May 15th deadline to June 15th. Because it's become obvious that the state legislature cannot get a budget done on time. This deadline that for when districts need to tell teachers yay or nay, on the job for next year. And I think that's sad that we have to do that. The other thing, speaking of special session, I forgot to mention, I pre-filed a bill last week that would move that economic forecast from March 20th to February 20th to give us an additional month. There's downsides to that. Any forecast, take the weather, the further out they're predicting, the less accurate it is. So there are downsides to moving it, but I think we can at least start that process earlier and have a working document and have more time to come together. It's not just Democrats and Republicans. I mean, it's House, Senate, and Governor. You know, so it's not just partisan. It's the different bodies that are involved.
But as a follow-up to that, I
Sure.
apologize, but as a follow-up to that, then do you anticipate that when you return into special session, that there will be a close enough agreement that you will be able to quickly come to a decision? Or is this something that you anticipate would be another 30-day session, et cetera? I mean, what is the sense of the mood right now?
I'm embarrassed to answer this for you this way. I'll have a better idea after Thursday because I have what they call a Four Corners meeting, which is the House and the Senate negotiators, and I have that meeting on Thursday, and I'll have a better sense of where they are in the operating budget, the capital budget. To answer your question, a week ago, I wasn't very optimistic. Like I said, I heard earlier today that negotiations on the operating budget went very well. So my gut is that because if we came to an agreement on Monday, which isn't going to happen, but if it happened on Monday, there was an agreement done, it takes 48 hours just to produce and pump out the paper. And then you got to give time. You got to do the public hearing. I mean, we have to do it right. I mean, we could shove it through without any public input, but I don't think that's right. You know, so you got to give some time. I mean, it really, from the time you have an agreement until you can vote it out, you're looking at a solid week. And that's just to get out of one chamber. You know, so the hope is that there's an agreement that it can go through both the Senate and the House simultaneously. You know, so an optimistic viewpoint, I'd say the end of May is the optimist in me. The pessimist says, I'm having a horrible June 30th. So, I hope that we have this done in May. The other part of that too, so a special session is called for 30 days, doesn't mean you have to use all 30 days. So there's that as well.
Back with education, excuse me, we know there's a Senate budget, the House budget, the governor's budget, but one of the things that I think was disconcerting to me is the fact that when the Senate budget came out, they said that, you know, they were really doing their best to address the McCleary decision lawsuit to fully fund basic education for our schools in Washington State. And that they were going to start by dealing with the MSOCs and school transportation issues and a couple of other things. Then after doing a little more research and finding out how they, you know, and at first it looked like, great, if we get help with that, it's going to be a real plus. Then when you dig a little deeper, you find out where how they're going to be doing that is by taking funds away from CTE, Career and Technical Education programs, and from other programs to try to fully fund these other issues. So it's, to me, they're still not really dealing with the problem. They're just shifting the money to robbing Peter to pay Paul. So are people aware that how that funding was planned and that doesn't answer our problems because it would be a severe cut to our CTE programs. I'm not sure, but we did do and to other programs also within the district, but we did do a side-by-side of the three different budgets and how it would affect this district.
Right.
And it doesn't fix the problem. It just masks it. So.
You know, and I think all three budgets, frankly, do that to an extent. And you're right. You know, in the Senate budget, they frankly have shifted some funds, and it's kind of a little bit of a shell game. Take some funds out of this fund, move it over to here, and then refund this one with something over here. And it is confusing to figure it out. On the House side, the House just said, let's just tax everybody another $1 billion and call it good. The governor said, I'm going to increase K-12 funding by putting a whole bunch of social programs into the K-12 line item and put the funding that way, and I'm going to say that I funded K-12. I think all three of those budgets, frankly, are wrong. And again, it goes back to, I think, education needs to be a standalone budget and have the transparency and do it early in the session and not play these games that all three bodies have done with it. So again, I would just caution that none of those three budgets are going to be the final product. And it's going to be somewhere in the middle of all that. So I hear you, and I met with Wayne earlier, and I get emails a lot from the education folks, whether it's teachers or administrators, and so I hear you. And there's you can look at different numbers across the board, and some people say, well, we're spending $10,300 per student in the state, and how can you not do it with that amount of money? And I can tell you, as a parent, I get frustrated. I got 2 kids that are 2 years apart, and it's a maze to figure out which one has which graduation requirements. To me, as a parent, that's frustrating. I mean, we test the heck out of our students. And my personal opinion is, if you're taking the course and you're doing the coursework and you're passing the course, you have the knowledge. Throwing another piece of paper at the student, I don't think solves it. And those are added costs. The different evaluation systems that are in there, I think adds more burden. Where all that comes from, though, is because every time that there's funding identified from somewhere, there's a demand from taxpayers for accountability. The only way the legislature knows how to do that accountability when it comes to education is say, let's just give them another test. And I'm being a little flippant about it, but that's in my opinion. So I would like to see, I don't think there's any issue with the state establishing what the graduation standard should be. But I think that's where it should stop. The state should back up and say, okay, go districts. And you would figure out how best to achieve that. If you want to test your students a tremendous amount, then do that. But I don't like the constant mandates that we put on it. And frankly, I buck my party a little bit on that. So throwing that out there.
That would be another lovely issue to look at, are all the unfunded mandates that are required, and really a committee going through those and determining which ones we just really don't need, that have maybe been there for 30 years or whatever, or that have done and had unintended consequences. So.
Right. I hear you.
I know. We've talked.
So what's your definition of fully funded basic education?
My definition of it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's the question we've got to really answer. To me, it's K-12. Okay, I do support full day kindergarten. Times have changed, and I think that's a fundamental core to K-12 education. I believe we need to put a lot more focus in those earlier years and identifying issues then. And those of you that are teachers in the room, I think it's fair to say that a kid that's struggling in 3rd grade usually doesn't suddenly become the ace student. In subsequent years, usually that struggle continues. There's always exceptions to that, but I think we need to focus more on those earlier years and make sure that there's a solid foundation. Can I throw a number at you? No, I can't.
That's my next question.
Because it is so confusing. And this is the problem, and the trouble that I have, just being part of that dome down there, is that, again, and it goes back even to the regulation question. We never stop and ask, what we have, does it make sense? We keep just piling on and expecting that's the solution. And we do this with everything, whether it's business regulation or education. Our solution is always just to add another element to it and never stop and turn around and say that what we have makes sense. And so, I'd like to just strip the veil down from education and really figure this out. And, I don't have the magic bullet standing here today to solve education. I know the frustrations as a parent. I see them from my kids as students. I hear them from the teachers and the administrators. I think we just need to bring that all together and find that best solution. And to me, the answer is not in piling on more on the state. If you read the McCleary decision, it doesn't say $1.2 billion makes it all better. McCleary decision said you have to fix it. Yes, they said we have not fully funded it, but they also said there are issues there that need to be addressed and fixed. Yeah. And I think the governor, frankly, tried to duck that by putting social programs into K-12, saying, I fully funded it. Right. And that was not the case.
So when the courts ordered it to be fully funded, or now to fix it, did they give a time limit on that?
The McCleary decision did it? Yeah, it's 2016.
2016, okay.
18. So, and then we got a culvert case out there, maybe you've heard of, which is another issue. Do you know? Anybody know what the culvert case is? So it goes all the way back to the 1850s. And, the territorial governor Isaac Stevens negotiated the treaties with the Indian tribes in the territory and established a whole set of parameters. And then we had the Bolt. So out of that, a lawsuit started in 1970, and the Bolt decision occurred, which was phase 1 of that trial. And now phase 2 just concluded. It's the United States versus Washington. This just concluded in the past couple of months. And what that is saying is that the state has, through its road construction and its forest practices, has has hurt the ability of salmon to do their migration. Thus, that has affected the ability of Indian tribes to have their rights under treaty to the amount of fish that they're entitled to. And so the federal judge, I want to say Rodriguez, ordered the state, we have to spend $1.2 billion, that number keeps coming up, within the capital budget in the next 4 or 6 years, and that the Department of Transportation has to spend a couple $1 billion, and they have 17 years to do it. And you start putting all these things together, that, the Cleary, it's getting tough. So that case is going to impact things. So maybe between that and the Cleary, there's a lot of money that's under court order to spend. And again, I think we need to look at the reforms too.
To do what? You said
the culvert. So the culverts weren't built properly. So one going under a road, and so what they say is that the fish can't make that passage to go upstream and to lay eggs to repopulate everything. So they've got to redo these culverts across the state.
To piggyback on the education one, in order for them to have gone to the Supreme Court, there had to have been established a requirements, or in other words, they had to sue against the fact that this particular level was not being funded properly. Where did the information to create that this is what is required, and I'm not saying it very well, but in other words, who made those decisions? Was it the legislature that passed laws saying this is what our standards are going to be, and then somebody sued and said, oh, you're not funding those standards, or did the standards come from somewhere else?
It's a combination of things over time, and I'm not the legal expert, so this is my.
Can it be solved with that at that end of it, though?
Well, what happened is over time, so that the Constitution said is the paramount duty of the state to fully fund basic education. And over time, through different court hearings and different statutes, basic education has come to be defined as K-12. And that is what basic education is defined in the state. Paramount duty says that's our first duty, is to fully fund it. And so there was a group of people that sued the state that it was not living up to its paramount duty. And again, I can't give you the legalese on it, but they sued, I believe it was in Thurston County Court. And that court determined it had jurisdiction. And anytime you sue the state, Thurston County does have jurisdiction. And then the appeal went from there and ultimately to the Supreme Court. So,
but who made the standard for the K through 12?
The state has over time. The legislature has over time.
The legislature did that, so you could correct that. If you could correct that if there are issues in there that aren't working.
For what was found on the
Okay, so that is a way that you could go in and evaluate. I'm not saying cut things or anything like that, but truly evaluate the pilot programs or many of those programs that are being considered as primary for funding, and ensure that they really are accomplishing what they're supposed to. Does that make sense?
Sure.
You could, because there's a lot of programs in there that are like one over here, they're all over the place. And who oversees whether those are accomplishing the original goals that they were passed for?
Can I comment?
Yep.
I'm Sue McCausland on the Shelton School Board, and I've been on the board since 2003, which has been a grand education in and of itself. But one of the issues is not just the legislature, it's that you're dealing with the requirements that come down from the State Board of Education.
Okay.
And and then you have OSPI, who's supposed to initiate the things that come from the legislature and that come from the State Board of Education. And a lot of times, those things don't all mesh together. But we, in the school district, are then given the responsibility to make sure that whatever the State Board of Education passes and the legislature requires happen within your schools.
Okay.
Does it always make sense? No. Do they meet? Do they fund together or mesh together? A lot of times, no, not really. And
Really?
so, but still, it's our requirement to make sure that it's done, or we don't get the funding we need to pay our teachers
Right.
and staff and pay the light bill and all of that. Just give me a call sometime, I can show you some of the discrepancies. Just for instance, in transportation, out of our transportation, which is, our kids have to be transported to school in our community. We pay over $700,000 out of our levy funds that everybody thinks is for extras in the school, for transportation, for our buses. For our special ed, it's over $500,000 that should be fully funded by the state. Those are where I talked about unfunded mandates. We have all these mandates that we're supposed to do, but they're not funded. Then let's talk about bookkeeping, and that's a whole other set of stuff.
Thank you.
So just to change the subject a little bit, there's a lot of talk about smaller government living within our means. And it certainly sounds good, but the main economic driver in Mason County is government, with 5,500 jobs. Not all in Mason County, but the people who fill those jobs live in Mason County. And as a matter of fact, if you take the 50 top employers, you can go through the whole list and it won't get close to the 5,500 jobs. So, in a more pragmatic approach, how's that going to affect us? Because those folks, they make reasonable wages with retirement and with benefits. Those things don't come around any longer in the private sector. So how's that going to affect us when we talk about making different smaller?
No, that's a great question. The governor campaigned on it, has promoted lean management, that Toyota implemented or started out 20 years ago. And a lot of what he said is that, the cost savings we're going to get from that, we would be able to apply to education. And so here we are, 6 months into, or 5 months into his term and my term, and suddenly we're seeing that that's not working. That it's going to take, what they're saying is it's going to take multiple years for that to come to fruition. I'll say this, though, when it comes to government, and, and I see it at the state level. First and foremost, it's my issue at the state level. It's not with the rank and file guy or lady, coming and doing their deal every day. The legislature sets by statute the number of FTEs, the number of full-time employees in the state. But what happens is you have agency heads and department heads that can circumvent that and add in mid-level above that and essentially inflate that FTE. And what they're doing is they're inflating their budget to justify a higher budget the following year. And I think that's disingenuous. So to answer your question, that's where we have to look. Could some of those people live in this county? Yeah, they sure could. We have to get away from that practice. And the legislature, frankly, needs to flex its muscle and say, no, this is what we're setting in statute. I'm not going to speak to the county, or the school district on where they are with employment. Those are up to them. That's out of my hair, but which isn't much. But at the state level, that's where I'm looking, and where I think we need to address it. Does it have an impact on communities? It certainly does. But I think we have a paramount duty also, though, to run an efficient form of government, and make sure that we are using taxpayer dollars in the most effective way.
Just to follow up a little bit of that, when I see people talk about, I hear people talk about waste, and there always will be some waste. I like it to be wasted on people, jobs, rather than other projects that are ballooned out of proportion, capital improvement projects that have runaway cost overruns and that kind of thing. So if we were going to waste money, I personally have preferred to waste it on people.
Well, I'd like to see us get away from the bureaucracy of what we've done with land management just in this county alone. And, why do 50% of the people in this county have to commute outside the county to go to work? It's because we've made it so difficult. If you knew somebody right now that wanted to open a factory in this county, needed 20 acres, it's pretty impossible to get that done. And I'm just picking a factory out of, for an example. We need to look at how we're managing, or not managing our quote-unquote growth management. It's killed the rural community. And I would much rather see those people privately employed than just creating a bureaucracy for the sake of having a job. We've managed to the umpteenth degree, and we need to back away from that.
It's true that the public sector can do that. They can actually create jobs. The private sector, jobs are, it's an unfortunate byproduct of doing business because it costs so much money to employ people. But the public sector is the only sector that can actually create jobs for jobs' sake. And I was just wondering, at a certain point, it's necessary, but if it's carried to extremes, maybe it goes a little bit too far. But when we have so many people out of work, I just hate to see anybody lose their job.
Sure, I don't wish that on anybody either. Anyone else? You got about 10 minutes.
What has happened to the people involved in the 520 fiasco?
Yeah.
That, from the head to the engineers and all this that were involved in saying, oh, well, this is fine, and now it's not. Are they still working or have they been canned?
Yeah, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the top few in that situation did lose their job.
Yeah, they were removed.
Yep. And so the 520 bridge, the floating bridge, the north floating bridge, they built the pond. This was your last gas tax increase going to work. They built the floating bridge that sinks. They built an on-ramp in the wrong spot, and they built a ferry that lifts 7 degrees. So, do you want another gas tax increase? But so yeah, to answer your question, the engineers on that did lose, and I don't know what the number of people was, but there were people that have lost their job.
So the engineers, in addition to the head lady, lost their job?
I can't speak specifically to what positions. There were people that lost their job over it, though.
The Department of Transportation person did not get reelected.
Reappointed.
Reappointed. Okay, there's somebody new that's in that position. But my concern about that was, are they addressing the situation of where the shoddy concrete's coming from China or Japan or someplace far west, instead of using quality concrete that's a mile and a half away from where they're building these?
I can assure you there's been sufficient heat and pressure put on that whole project that it is under a microscope. So, anyone else? Yep.
Yeah, I have one more question. To what does the Department of Colleges report to, or who is overseeing what they do, or who takes complaints about the way they act?
So the Department of Ecology reports to the governor. The agency, the department head is an appointee of the governor. And so subsequently that's who they report to, is the governor. They have legislative liaisons and that we work with. So I mean, if you have a complaint regarding ecology, you can go through us and we will get that ball moving. Us being me and Kevin or Representative Haig or Senator Sheldon, we can get that moving. And that's probably your most effective way.
Because you were talking about, laws and ordinances, or what did you say? Regulations. There's all kinds of regulations that they're not enforced. They just bypass them or ignore them or whatever. And I have several serious complaints about trying to deal with them on things. So I could write a letter to you about this?
Sure. Yep. And what will happen, I mean, we'll get you in touch with the right person to handle it, and we'll be on the follow-up to it. So,
I have a question about the whole charter schools issue. I didn't want that to pass, but it did. And so now with this whole budget thing coming up, my concern with it was always that those schools were going to end up in places that they weren't as necessary, because even though I really wasn't for it, I think it'd do a lot of good in our community, take some of the pressure off of schools. So what's the feeling about how those schools are going to be funded? How is that going to affect the education budget? Can you give us a update on that?
Yeah, so the charter school initiative they're still working through the rulemaking process on it, and it's very similar, frankly, to the marijuana initiative. It passed, and now Liquor Control Board's got to figure out how do we implement what the voters said to do. And the same thing is going on with the charter school situation. The first applications to it, I believe, were just done in the last month or so. You're not going to see a charter school in operation until at least the following, not this coming school year, but the following one. And there is, and I'll need to come back to you on this as well, but it's my understanding so we have a charter board oversight or committee that is processing those, and again, they're working through how to implement it. So I can't fully answer it for you. It's that process is developing, and I don't know the ins and outs well enough to fully answer that, but we can get back to you.
Okay, well, that helps.
Anybody else? So I appreciate coming here tonight. And we'll do more of these in the fall and leading up to the next session and do them around the district. But I wanted the opportunity to just get in front of you. And if you haven't, we have our binder on the back. You can sign up for our email updates. And don't hesitate to email me or call me anytime. And Kevin can attest to this. I'm willing to take the shots, and we have some frequent flyers that email me that don't like me, but I'm happy to engage because I think it's part of the process, and to have that different viewpoint. So just I encourage it, and we'll find where we can work together. This state, we're the number 5 state in this country for exports to foreign markets. We have a lot that we can be doing in this state. We can move this state forward, and it's just we've got to continue to be involved, and and it starts just with doing these things here. And we're believe me, Republican or Democrat down there, I believe we all want the same end result. We have different visions on how we get there, but the more involved you are as constituents, the better that process is. So, I just appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight, and door is always open, so don't hesitate to call, email, come down there, and be happy to meet with you anytime. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.